Before we dive into this interview, I want to acknowledge that today is April 29th, 2025, which marks the 50-year remembrance of the fall of Saigon. And with that said, I would like to thank my father, Ba Vong Nguyen, and my mother, Nyo Nguyen, for their sacrifice, dedication, and hard work in providing so much for our family. So in today's conversation, I'm honored to speak with T. Cavagnaro. Like my own personal family story, T is a Vietnamese refugee who, along with her family, escaped Saigon in 1975 during the fall. T, along with her husband Jimmy, in 2018 established Thanking Vietnam Veterans of Barnegat in New Jersey, an initiative aimed at honoring Vietnam War veterans. And so, as part of this effort, T and her husband personally funded and dedicated a Vietnam Veterans Monument in Barnegat's Gazebo Park on March 29th, 2018. The monument features a 21 by 28-inch black plaque inscribed with Welcome Home. T organizes annual events on National War Veterans Day to recognize and thank all Vietnam veterans. And in recognition of her efforts, she was awarded the Americanism Medal by the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution in September 2024. So it's always an honor to talk with inspirational leaders helping to uplift the community around them. Thank you for being here, T.
Thank you so much, Mickey. So, I'm a Vietnamese refugee. I was actually born in Vietnam, and my family and I were able to escape on the last day
Mm.
that South Vietnam existed as a free country. So we escaped the day that Saigon fell.
Is that the
And
30th or the 29th?
30th, the
30th.
30th,
Okay, the next
April
day. Yeah.
30th. We escaped actually 7 hours before the president of South Vietnam surrendered the country.
Wow.
So yeah, we escaped by the skin of our teeth. And quite honestly, I really didn't know much about my Vietnamese history and my escape story growing up. I just kind of wanted to be as Americanized as possible because I was only a couple of years old and I just wanted to grow up to be American and didn't want to be seen as anything different. And I just wanted to fit in. And it wasn't until about the 40th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. So this is in 2015 now. So Saigon fell in 1975. And in
Hmm.
2015, I started seeing things about the fall of Saigon and the 40th anniversary and this and that. And that prompted me to start getting a little more curious about my background. And I was also more comfortable, with getting back in touch with my roots and whatnot. And in addition to that, Vietnam veterans themselves, the Americans who fought in the Vietnam War, they started advertising who they were and where they were as well too, because prior to 2015, you didn't really see a lot of them wearing their hats and their jackets and
Hmm.
bumper stickers on their cars and whatnot. And I started really embracing the fact that I was a Vietnamese refugee and I was helped by the Vietnam veterans. And I started going out of my way to just thank them, whether it
Hmm.
be in person or car to car, if I was driving by and saw a bumper sticker and online because social media was really in its heyday at that
Yeah.
point. And I had a really moving experience online that kind of changed the course of my life since then. And it was with a Vietnam veteran who was a total stranger to me. I didn't know who he was. And I was just commenting on a post on Facebook about the Vietnam War and Vietnam veterans and jumped in and, I was doing my whole, hey, I'm a Vietnamese refugee. And I just want to thank everybody who helped us out. And this Vietnam veteran responded to my post, seeing that I was a Vietnamese refugee. And he apologized.
Hmm.
He started out by apologizing and saying that he was sorry. And he continued by saying that he was only sorry that he didn't kill all of my ancestors first.
Hmm.
And that was a response that I was not expecting at all
Hmm.
because all of my previous interactions with Vietnam veterans had been very positive. And normally, your instinct is to either fight back or argue back with
Hmm.
somebody who attacks you,
Yeah.
just because you're defending yourself, not because you want to inflict any harm or anything like that. So your instinct is to either attack back or argue back or to just step away and disengage
Hmm.
in circumstances like that. And his response was just so strange
Yeah.
that it actually pushed me to look into why he would respond in such a way even more. And what I wound up doing was I wound up talking to a lot of Vietnam veterans that I knew and talking to my parents and finding out, what our history was like. And what I discovered in talking to both groups, I found to be so shocking and so profound because I didn't learn about it in school that I was like, oh my gosh, you know, um, this man attacked me because of all of the horrific things that he went through as a Vietnam veteran. And I understood why he felt the way that he did. And I knew that it wasn't a personal attack because we didn't know each other, but I was a symbol and I represented everything that was terrible that happens to him.
Yeah.
And I wanted to try to, I felt like guilty. I felt guilty
Hmm.
because because of people like me, because I was a Vietnamese refugee and he was forced to come and help us, I felt guilty that he was put through something like this.
Hmm.
And I felt obligated to try to help him and help like any other Vietnam veterans who may be also stuck in this mental prison of torture, from way back then. And I felt like I needed to do something about that. And
Hmm.
so my husband and I then founded this movement called Thanking Vietnam Veterans in Barnegat because we're from Barnegat, New Jersey. And we decided that we should try to find as many Vietnam veterans as possible, to reach out to them, to honor them, to let them know how much they're appreciated and how much, even though we can't change history, we can't turn back time, we can't take back the things that happened to them, at
Yeah.
least now we can tell them how much they're valued. Regardless of what happened to them in the past, because it's not too late, especially since they're still alive now.
Hmm.
They're still alive. So we wanted to do that. And we did that through a couple different ways. We do that with by inviting them to these little small groups of Vietnam veterans where we just treat them to free dinners and drinks. And we sit and we talk to them, and get to know them and have them get to know us because we find that that is equally as helpful to them, knowing for them to see like who they helped because
Hmm.
that's something that they didn't really get a chance to encounter so that they can see the fruits of their labor. So we do that. We also built a monument in their honor and we completely paid for it by ourselves. We didn't take a
Hmm.
dime from anyone. And it's the only monument of its kind in the whole country
Wow.
where it's a monument for Vietnam veterans that was completely paid for by an individual Vietnamese refugee.
Hmm.
And then we also have annual events that we hold for them on Vietnam War Veterans Day, which is March 29th of every year. It's a new holiday, new national holiday for Vietnam veterans that started in 2018. And we have annual events for them that have hundreds and hundreds of Vietnam veterans coming from all over the state of New Jersey and all around New Jersey, other states, other neighboring states as well too, where we really get a lot of our community members involved, whether it be some local businesses, but especially our schools, from high schools to elementary schools to colleges and everything in between, because it's important that they know also what happens to our Vietnam veterans and how they were gaslighted so many
Hmm.
years ago and made to feel like, they did something wrong in helping
Hmm.
us. So we get them involved so that they know, so that the Vietnam veterans also know that they know, and also so that this tradition of honoring them continues well after my husband and I are long gone.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's really where our passion is now with thanking Vietnam veterans in Barnegat.
Yeah. And you had Mr. Hugh Doyle.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Commander Hugh Doyle was
Uh,
our keynote speaker for this past event that took place uh, just a little over a week ago on March 28th, Friday, March 28th, 2025. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
How did that yeah, how did the whole event go? Just
It
in
was a smashing success. I mean,
excellent.
so many people told us that our events are always great, but we knocked it out of the park this year because we had a lot of new aspects that were added to the program. And the connection that we had with Hugh was something that we really aimed for and strived to do with this particular year because this year the event is taking place on the year of the
That's
50th
right.
anniversary, right?
That's right.
The 50th
50,
anniversary.
time flies.
I know, the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who's in the Navy, and she was able to connect Hugh and I together
Okay.
because she teaches at the Navy War School, and
Oh,
Hugh
wow.
is often a guest speaker there.
Wow.
And she was hearing his story about how he was involved in helping South Vietnamese ships,
Yeah.
safely go from one part of the world to the other. And she was like,
Right.
oh my gosh, I know my friend escaped on the last day of
Yeah.
Saigon and was able to leave on a ship. And I betcha they are connected somehow. And sure enough, we were. He
Wow.
remembers our ship. He remembers the ship that I escaped on, which was my uncle's ship because my uncle was a captain
Mm.
of a Vietnamese naval ship. So, you know, bringing him into our event and explaining to the audience what our connection was
Yeah.
really was a powerful thing. And our other guest speakers and other aspects of our event really tie in this whole thing about it being the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. And all the members of our military, both on the Vietnamese side and especially on the American side, were highlighted this year with that. And it was just a very poignant event for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Doyle 10 years ago in Boston with the first screening of The Last Days in Vietnam.
Oh,
And yeah, we were there
wow.
talking about it with Rory Kennedy, and so awesome gentleman, and so it was really, it was really nice to meet him there. Uh, so at the at this event this year, were there any sort of aha moments or key moments that you discovered, that was different this year versus the events from previous years, or
Yeah,
with regards to the 50 year and the reflection back on that?
yeah, it was there's a feeling of brotherhood
Mm-hmm.
between the American veterans and the Vietnamese veterans that doesn't have enough opportunities to really cement and to grow, unfortunately.
Right.
And our events bring them together because our events have, both the Vietnam veterans, but we also have Vietnamese veterans at our ceremonies as well, too.
Mm.
And they really they love being able to get together and talk with each other because they're like, oh, we fought side by side, out in the field, and we trained side by side sometimes too, because one of our speakers who unfortunately was a POW after he was captured and put into the re-education camps after Saigon fell. He actually trained in Fort Benning in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
So not only did he train next to our American counterparts, he then fought with them afterwards in Vietnam. So they really love having and hearing connections like that and being able to talk to people like that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of sadness, in understanding how many of the Vietnamese military members passed away,
Yeah.
along with the American military members too. So
Right.
there's a lot of common ground when it comes to our Vietnamese military members and the American ones. And this
Yeah.
year, besides having specific keynote speakers that kind of tie all of that in together. We also had a formal flag folding ceremony, like a
Mm.
memorial flag folding ceremony,
Right.
and it was the recipient, the representative that we chose to receive the flag was a Gold Star daughter.
Mm.
And Gold Star families in America are the ones who have family members who have passed away
Yeah.
from war and in combat. And this Gold Star daughter, her father was shot down in Vietnam very, very early on in 1964. So
Mm.
it's over 60 years ago that he was shot down, and his remains are still missing. They've
Mm.
never been found. And so her family, they still haven't been able to have peace in being able to bury their husband and their father.
Yeah.
And At our events, what I really love to be able to do is I give a full background on every single one of our speakers and I explain every single aspect that we incorporate because I like people in the audience and attendees, especially if they're civilians and especially if they're kids too, to really understand why so and so is talking, who they are, how they tie into the event, what makes them important, why they were chosen to come up there and talk. And I like them to understand, I like our audience members to understand why we're having the ceremony and what that ceremony is about, specifically with the flag folding ceremony, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone who comes to our event understands what every aspect of our event is about,
Mm,
and it really hits home. You know, it's not just, and here is so and so with no background information
mm,
whatsoever. And there were a lot of tears shed this year because of
yeah,
that.
yeah. In through the years that you've talked with veterans, what are some of the themes that you've seen in terms of the things that they're facing, coming back to civilian life, or just the stories that they've had to deal with, that you're able to at least kind of draw commonalities with the Vietnam veterans that
I think they just never felt heard and they never felt seen
mm,
for who they are because they were forced in a way to bury that part of their lives, to bury that
right.
part of their own identity for most of their lives. You know, where when they first came back, they were rejected everywhere they turned for being a Vietnam veteran. So if they wore their uniform, they were rejected by the general public because the general public immediately were able to identify them as a Vietnam veteran, and they fought with them, they disrespected them, et cetera, et cetera. But even when they did something like apply to schools or find a job, when a lot of these universities or colleges heard or found out that they fought in the Vietnam War, their applications were rejected.
Mm,
The employers rather, the places of business also rejected them. And this is kind of unheard of to
yeah,
happen in today's times. Like we would be like completely shocked if somebody did that now, right? But that's what happens to them back then. And then I didn't know this until I started getting more involved with the Vietnam veterans too, that when they turned to a lot of the veterans service organizations, right? The ones that they thought, if anyone is going to understand what we went through, it's going to be our veterans service organizations like the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VFW, or the American Legion. They walked in thinking that they were going to find solace, only to be kicked out because they were told that they were an embarrassment to the veteran community because they were the first military members in the history of the United States to lose a war. And how shameful are they to,
mm,
bring that to our military history? So I explained to, because we go to a lot of schools and we do these presentations, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but
yeah,
I try to explain to the students, I'm like, so, if you were a Vietnam veteran, if you put yourselves in their shoes, how would you feel about that? Where everywhere you turned, as soon as you revealed that you were a Vietnam veteran in some way or another, the tables turned, and not the tables turned, I'm sorry, like everything changed for you. Everyone rejected you. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with you. Would you continue admitting or talking about your time in Vietnam and talking about the fact that you were a Vietnam veteran? And everybody unanimously says, no, I wouldn't. Because you have to survive and you can't keep on getting beaten down and you have to find a job somewhere. So,
yeah,
no, you're not going to talk about it. But you can't repress things and just repress them and expect no repercussions from it. Because if you just repress things, it comes out in explosively negative ways.
right,
And
right.
I explained to our student population that this is why Vietnam veterans then struggled with alcoholism and drug
Mm,
abuse, and there was a lot of domestic violence,
yeah,
and there was a lot of suicide.
mm,
And that was my aha moment, when it came to that Vietnam veteran who had attacked me online. Because once I
mm,
learned that, I was like, oh my gosh, it totally makes sense now. So I think the fact that we have things like these events. We have people learning to go up to Vietnam veterans and thanking them for their service, but more importantly, welcoming them home. I think that that makes our Vietnam veterans feel seen and heard as Vietnam veterans. And so they can be themselves more. And it really helps to, um, get closure in some ways in their lives.
Yeah.
And I think it also helps to bridge some gaps too, because a lot of the people that I talk to and give the presentations to, they're grandchildren of Vietnam veterans.
Mm.
And what I find a lot is our Vietnam veterans didn't really talk much about their time in the war to their own family members, to their immediate family members, whether it
Right.
be their spouses or to their children, because, that's what they decided they had to do in order to survive. And that's what they grew up with. So the children, like there might be this resentment about, oh, dad was always grouchy and he was a curmudgeon, and I could never ask him about the Vietnam War. And so there's that history there, and they feel uncomfortable about changing that history by broaching the subject now as
Mm.
adults, right? But when it comes to grandchildren, things are completely different. And the grandchildren have this pass where they can approach their grandfather or their great uncle or whoever and say, hey, I heard that I understand you were a Vietnam veteran. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And they can ask more innocent questions, basic questions, without the fear of um, their grandfather being like, how could you not know this? Like it's different. It's just a different dynamic. And I feel like our Vietnam veterans love getting these questions from their grandkids because they feel like their grandkids are actually interested in
Hmm.
talking about it and they are dying to talk about it. But again, there's that history with their spouses and their children where they may feel like, they'll never understand. But with their grandchildren, it's like, well, I might have a chance to help them understand. So I'm more comfortable with talking to my grandkids about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wonderful thing that and your husband are championing, in your area. Do you see your organization grow into other cities, or is it just focused in your hometown, in
No,
terms
oh
of?
my gosh. No, we have spread so much, especially
Hmm.
with the school presentations. We have spread so much to so many other towns, so
Awesome.
many other schools, so many other universities, so many organizations even,
Mm.
who hear about us. And there's a lot of our kids don't know, not our kids, but the students today, they don't know a lot about the Vietnam War, but
Yeah.
that's also because the adults who are teaching them also don't know a lot about the Vietnam War.
Hmm.
So a lot of organizations now, adult organizations will invite us in so that we can give our same presentation to them so that they can learn about it. And if they learn about it, then they can teach it and pass it on to others too.
Right.
So yeah, it's all over New Jersey. We really embrace anyone who wants us to come and do a presentation for them. I take off from work and I do this because I feel that it's really important to do
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I want to learn about, again, 50 years ago here. How did your, expand a little bit more if you're comfortable, in terms of how your family, what happened during the last few days of Vietnam, and how you, from step by step, in terms of how you ended up in New Jersey from 50 years ago.
Yeah, well, my family was really, really fortunate in that my uncle on my dad's side was in the South Vietnamese Navy. And he wasn't
Hmm.
just, a member of the South Vietnamese Navy, he was a captain in
Yeah.
the Navy. So he was the captain of a naval destroyer called the Chi Lang 2. The
Mm.
whole number was HQ-08. He
Mm.
was actually the youngest captain in the history of the South Vietnamese Navy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool little
That's neat.
factoid there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we always I was told that nobody wanted to leave, but you kind of had to prepare for the possibility of
Of
having to
course.
leave and having to leave very quickly. And he and my dad and other family members, both on my dad's side and my mom's side, did make preparations just in case we had to go. And one of them was my uncle. Um, he wanted to get his ship closer to shore so that family members could easily get to his ship from the dock, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
normally his ship would be all the way out in the ocean, and that would be a very difficult journey to try to get a lot of people from the land over to his boat. So he basically pretended that his engines in his boat needed to get serviced,
Mm.
and he had two engines on his boat. And he was like, "Oh, no, don't take both of them. Don't ask why, but just take one engine at a time." And that allowed him to keep one engine on board so that we could make a quick getaway
Mm.
if and when we needed to.
All right.
And it was the night before, it was April 29th, and we were living, my immediate family, my father and my mom and my siblings, we were living in the suburbs of Saigon. So we were
Mm.
across the river, across the Saigon River, where the rest of our extended family lived in the city of Saigon.
Yeah.
And we were living in this house, and the house down the street, down the block, got bombed.
Mm.
So we were like, okay, yeah, that's time to go if that's gonna happen,
Right.
And so we had to take a motorcycle and get our whole family of five out on this one motorcycle. And it
Mm.
was a treacherous ride because it
Yeah.
wasn't like five adults or five teenagers or, semi-adults who were on this motorcycle knowing how to help balance it and be quiet and, all this other stuff because we couldn't just hop in a car and go on the major roads to cross the bridge to get back to the city of Saigon. We couldn't do that because the enemy was way too close by, and we didn't want to get captured and, by the enemy at that point. So, in my family, it was my parents and my older sister, who was only 10 years old at the time.
Mm.
I was only a year and a half, not even
Yeah.
a year and a half. I was just over a year old at the
Mm.
time. And I wasn't even the youngest in the family because I had a younger brother who was 18 days old.
Wow.
So my dad and my mom had to try to figure out how to get this family of five, out on this one motorcycle and cross a river at the same time without
Right.
using the bridge. And we had a blow up raft that we brought along with us on the motorcycle, and we were able to get from our house to the banks of the river, had a blow up raft, and their plan was they were going to throw the kids into the raft, hope that nobody freaked out and fell overboard and drowned and died. And my
Mm-hmm.
parents were going to swim alongside the raft across the Saigon River, which is a huge river and fast flowing. Like I will in schools, I will have a picture of a similarly sized river for the kids to understand what we were up against. And thankfully, we didn't have to do that. We didn't have to swim across and risk people drowning and dying because we got picked up by a police boat who saw, my parents like fumbling along the side of the river.
Yeah.
And according to my parents at the time, the police boat was the police at the time, if there was anything weird, any suspicious activity, they just kind of picked you up, rounded you up, threw you into a jail cell, and interrogated you and figured things out later. And if you seemed to be non-communist and a good guy, they would let you go. And if you were not, and it turned out that you were a communist, obviously they would retain you.
Yeah.
So they picked us up and we didn't have to cross the river. And then after that, we were able to get onto my uncle's boat and make our way down the Saigon River. And my uncle's boat was heavily overladen with people because it was a boat that was supposed to hold 104 people, and he wound up having 998 on there,
Wow.
running on only half the.
Wow. Wow.
And the engine wasn't on just like the back where he could just, rev the engine and just keep on going. The engine was on one side of the boat. So you know that if you have power on only one side of the boat, when you try to rev the engine, the boat's going to just keep on turning in one direction,
Mm.
so you can't make opposite turns. And he had to
Right.
kind of bump the boat along certain things very gently and very carefully so that he could make his way down that twisty, turny Saigon River
Mm.
without damaging the boat to the point where it would be beyond repair and sink and, have those 1,000 people die.
Yeah.
And what was really amazing for me to find out is that my uncle had the opportunity to leave earlier.
Mm.
with, on bigger boats that weren't as small as his. And he chose not to. And he chose to stay behind so that he could save his entire family.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
you know? And I didn't find out about that until really recently.
Wow.
And it chokes me up,
Yeah.
like knowing about that because things could have been really, really different if
Yeah.
he just thought about his own immediate family and himself as
Mm.
opposed to the rest of the family members that were
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah.
And he was
Talk
able
about.
to save, everyone on my dad's side of the family, but also everyone on my mom's side of the family who married in to the
Mm.
family too. So he's a hero
A
in my
hero
book.
for sure. A hero for
Mhm.
sure. Sacrificing, safety to just to help others, help family members and friends. So that's an amazing story there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, this is where Hugh comes in, where we were able to meet up with all the other South Vietnamese naval ships and the U.S. Seventh Fleet down in
Mm.
Conton Island, where they escorted us to the Philippines, where we had to surrender our ship.
Mm.
And then from there, we were put on a different ship, a cargo ship called the
Yeah.
USNS Truman Kimbrough,
Right.
along with tens of thousands of other refugees, and we were sailed over to Guam. And from
Guam. Yeah.
Guam,
Yeah.
yep, and from Guam, we were there for about a month
Yeah.
before we got word that we were all going to America. Like my whole entire family, we weren't going to get split up. My immediate family, my extended family, we were all going to the same refugee camp in the
Mm.
United States, and that was located in Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, which was
Mm.
a former military training facility. So we all wound up there. And then from there, this is where we started getting split up a
Yeah.
little bit because it was dependent on the different sponsors who were taking each of our families. And our sponsor was a church in East Brunswick, New Jersey, which is Central Jersey. And
Yeah.
then we lived with a specific family who was a member of the congregation of that church. They moved us into their house and they took care of us, in so many amazing ways with teaching us English and finding jobs for both of my parents and helping us navigate our way and our life in this new country.
Yeah.
And, really just giving us all the tools that we needed to become successful and integrated citizens of America. And we're still like this, that family. The
Mm.
Mooney family is who had sponsored us. And they were just completely amazing in every single, and they were celebrities. Mr. Mooney was a TV star on
Oh
a
wow.
soap opera. Yeah, he was a TV star on a soap opera called All My Children.
Mm.
And Mrs. Mooney was this internationally famous opera singer. And
Wow.
she would travel the world singing in famous opera houses. And she founded the opera program at Rutgers University. So
Wow.
they were extremely giving people. And they
Yeah.
helped not just my immediate family, my
Right.
dad, but they also helped my dad's two brothers, because their families were having a hard time with finding jobs and meshing with their sponsors. And so the Moonies were like, have them come in and move in with us too.
Mm.
So it was crazy, how much they gave. And so I wound up in New Jersey and have always been a Jersey girl ever since then.
Wow. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's all my what's the soap the opera that you mentioned the the actor.
Mhm.
What was the name of the soap opera that
All
he was
my
on?
children.
All My Children. I remember that yeah, back in the 70s growing up and
Yep.
yeah, all of those soap. So that's amazing that the one of the actors in that soap opera
Yes.
sponsored your
Yes.
family. Outstanding.
Yes. Yes. His character name was Paul Martin, and the
Okay.
Martin family was big in All My Children,
Yeah.
so he was Paul Martin on there, and Bill Mooney is his name.
Yeah.
And
Well,
Valerie Goodall is his wife's name. That's her professional name, Valerie Goodall, and she's the opera singer and founded the opera program at Rutgers.
wow, who would know? That's
Uh-huh.
I mean, when we talk about like heroes, unsung heroes along, my family's story, your family's story, there's a lot of unsung hero stories out there that the compassion of, uh, family members, captains, strangers, community church members that have helped both of our respective families along the way. These are the people that my gratitude and my appreciation to them. I thank them whenever I can. And you're doing the same thing with your husband in terms of thanking the unsung veterans and the heroes around there. So many folks out there that are just big heart, big compassion along the way. And to your point, there's, anything could have happened along the journey, right? My
Mhm.
father's Chinook could have gone the wrong way, or the ship that you were on could have, gone in a different direction. And so just an absolute blessing from
Mhm.
that standpoint. So
Mhm.
um, talk about talk about growing up and assimilating. You came here probably by this time about a little over 1 years old, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I
yeah,
was about one and a half by the time we actually got into New Jersey
yeah.
and whatnot. And my parents had the foresight. So I didn't know much, as like a Vietnamese person or anything along those lines, but I did know that I didn't want to stick out like a sore thumb or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And not that it could be helped, because obviously we looked totally different,
Yeah.
from everybody else and stuff like that. Um, But my parents actually had the foresight to force my brother and sister and I to hang on to our Vietnamese traditions, because
Yeah.
they were like, you know what? We live in America now. You're always going to speak Vietnamese. You're always going to be taking part in American traditions, but you're not always going to be speaking Vietnamese, and you're not always going to be taking part in Vietnamese traditions, right? So they forced us to always speak Vietnamese to them, as long as we were in the house, or as long as we were talking to another Vietnamese person, like a relative, or over
Mm,
somebody else's house who happens to be Vietnamese. So they forced us to do that. And I hated it at the time. I was like, oh my gosh, like who cares? And, blah, 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 and stuff like that. But now in retrospect, I'm like, what a smart move. And I am so grateful that they did that, because a lot of my cousins who didn't have that forced upon them, their Vietnamese is a lot more rudimentary than
mm,
mine. And I feel like it's something that they may have missed out on, being able to communicate a little bit better with your elders at that
mm,
point. And even if not your elders, just other Vietnamese people,
yeah.
right? So they also took the time to like teach us how to read it and write
Mm,
it, even though the chances of us having to do that for any practical reason really didn't exist. They just
yeah.
wanted to make sure that we didn't forget those things.
Yeah.
And when we moved out of the Mooney's house, which, by the way, it only took my parents 1 year to save
Mm.
up enough money to buy their own house. I'm like,
Wow.
oh my
Awesome.
gosh, right,
Yeah.
exactly, right?
Amazing.
It's amazing. Um, we moved into a very blue collar town in New Jersey, and a lot of the people who lived there somehow or another were directly affected by the Vietnam War, whether or not their husbands had fought, or
Mm,
they lost a brother or father or uncle or something along those lines. So there was a lot of bitterness,
mm.
you know, um, as a result of that. Um,
Did you grow up facing a lot of racist comments and things? I sure did when I came, all white, elementary and throughout. So what was your experience around that in terms of, being different and kids being kids?
Well, and that's the thing. When I was growing up, I felt that kids were being racist.
Hmm.
But now as an adult, looking back, I realized kids were just being kids. Kids will
Mm,
pick on like anyone who's different in any way whatsoever.
yeah.
You could be completely white, just like them, and wear a red shirt instead of a blue shirt, and they would pick on you because of that. Right?
Mm,
So, growing up, I felt like, oh, this chip on my shoulder and stuff, more so because of it. But now looking back, I realized that it wasn't all about that. And the toughest part of growing up was that our house was right next to a public school, a public
mm,
elementary school. So we were subjected to a lot of name calling
yeah.
because of that, Chinky Chong, and a lot of like the Chinese based names,
Mm,
because there weren't a lot of like Vietnamese names that kids knew about back
right.
then. So it was a lot of that. And I remember my brother and I being like, we're not Chinese, we're Vietnamese and stuff. And it
Yeah.
didn't matter to them, but that was our defense. And we're like,
Right.
we're not Chinese, we're Vietnamese, right?
Right.
When we
Right.
were being called names like Chink and stuff like that. But what was a big saving grace to us when it came to kids growing up and our peers is that we wound up going to a Catholic school and not a
Mm,
public school.
mm,
And the story behind that is pretty funny because we're not Catholic. My
mm,
parents are Buddhist, but we're not Catholic.
yeah.
But they scholastically we were ready for school,
Mm,
but physically we were not ready. We were not able to start public school because public schools had a very strict age requirement in order to attend. So I was like 4 years old, and my parents were like, we got to get her out of the house, like she's ready for school, right? And the public schools were like, we can't, sorry, she's four. She's gonna have to wait until she's 5 years old. And
yeah.
my parents went to the Catholic school in town, St. Mary's in South River, and they're like, hey, listen, bright girl, she's gonna be really obedient and stuff like that. Can we take her to school here? I mean, she's not Catholic, but she's not gonna be any trouble. And the Catholic schools were like, well, you have to pay tuition to go here. My parents were like, yeah, we understand. It's okay. So they're like, yeah, we'll take her. So
Mm,
we started going to Catholic school. At the Catholic schools, the nuns were so strict. There was
tough.
no name calling at
Mm,
all. We were very protected in the
yeah.
Catholic schools. And it was a wonderful experience to have that because it really built up my confidence as a student, and it made me feel like somebody had my back, you know
Mm,
what I mean? And that students, my peers weren't going to be constantly making fun of me at
mm,
that point. So I experienced both things. I experienced students who were really curious about our culture and generous and kind and loving and supportive. And then on the other hand, students who, because they were going to school right next to our house and saw us and didn't know us as individuals, who would just make fun of us because we were different.
mm,
So, I, as a child growing up, I felt hurt by that, but
mm,
as an adult and understanding where that all came from,
yeah.
I'm very forgiving about it. Like I totally, totally get it. I totally get that kids were just being kids, and I
Mm,
totally get that adults who may have taken a pause, taken a beat when they saw us. I understand where that came from too, because a lot of the people in that town lost loved ones, you
mm,
know? And when I try to explain that to others, I'll I'll liken it to, hey, listen, what if you had a loved one and they were killed by a drunken driver,
mm,
right? You would probably view all drunken drivers in the same way and
mm,
have a lot of scorn towards them.
yeah.
And I think that's what was happening with me and my family. And I get it, it's human nature. I get it.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
the story that you share of just growing up, childhood and assimilating, very similar to my story, and I'm sure thousands of other uh, Vietnamese, kids such as yourself and myself growing up in America here and quickly having to juggle both our heritage or culture versus assimilating to a Western. And so we straddle, you and I, we had to straddle both sides. We had to navigate and appease, our parents or the heritage, the culture, along with the trying to fit in with the Western, community as well. And so, it wasn't for me. It wasn't easy, but we survived. We got through it. And we're stronger, for it. And so I see a lot of similarities in hearing your story, and I'm
mhm.
sure there are others out there the same.
I actually have a very funny story about this
Go
whole Catholic school thing, right? Because we were the first students who were non-Christian. And we weren't even like, forget being Catholic, we weren't even Christian,
Yeah.
And we were going to the school, and we were the first Asians to go to the
Mm,
school. So the school and my parents and my brother and I, because my sister wasn't going to the school, she was too old for it at that point. Um, we had to, like you said, we had to kind of navigate our way around this new situation that nobody had ever predicted they would have to experience. And my brother I was teacher's pet. I didn't really question anything going to school and stuff like that. And my brother was 2 grades younger. My brother questioned a lot more. He was his own person. And I think he was in kindergarten at this point, and I was in second grade, and the teachers, all the nuns were like, "Oh, she's wonderful. She's this, she's that. We never get any problems from her." And then here comes my brother, right? In kindergarten. And one of the first things that he asks the nuns there, right? He's going to school and stuff like that. And I forget the sister's name, but we'll just call her Sister Rose or Sister Marie, right? Sister Marie, Sister Marie. So, if Jesus is God and Buddha is also God, what are they to each other?
Mm.
And Sister Rose was like, uh-oh, I don't know how to answer this. Like, this was not taught to me, and I was not prepared for this. So she gave a very appropriate answer, saying, I think your parents will probably know this answer, and I think you should ask them tonight. Right? Which was perfect, right? So
Yeah.
that night at dinner, my brother addresses my dad and he's like, Dad, Dad, Dad. And he repeats the question, if Jesus is God and Buddha is God, what are they to each other? And my father was also not prepared for this question from this little kindergartner. And he takes a moment and he's thinking about it. And my dad says, they were drinking buddies.
Mm.
So, this kindergartner is now being told that Jesus and Buddha are drinking buddies. So my brother accepts that face value and he's like, oh, okay, cool. Right. And so my dad is like, "Phew, dodge that bullet. And now we can
Yeah.
just continue finishing dinner. What he didn't expect was that my brother was going to go back to school the next day and then
Mm.
relay this information, this newfound answer to Sister Marie. And so he's like, "Oh, sister, sister, I got the answer." And the sister's like, "Oh, what is it?" And she was really looking forward to it because now she's prepared and, she knows what the responsible answer is. And my brother says, "They're drinking buddies." And so, like, oh my goodness. So immediately she tells the principal, and half an hour later, the principal, who is also a nun, gets on the phone with my parents, and she's like, "We have to talk.
Yes.
We got to talk because we got to come up with appropriate answers for situations like this." But yeah,
Yeah.
it was a learning experience for a lot of people involved with.
Yeah. For sure. And that's a great story. I'll have to share that story with others. And um, talk about talk about your mom and dad, your mother and your father, and the things. Honor them in however or share in however you wish in terms of because for the story that I share is, you know, coming here 75, 6 years old roughly. It was just an adventure for me. My mom and dad had to do the heavy lifting.
Mhm.
And when I say heavy lifting, it's everything from my mother learning a completely new language, starting all over again. Just, talk about your mom and dad and the sacrifice and the challenge and the obstacles that they went through.
My dad was a professor
Mm,
at in Vietnam, and he taught probability and statistics.
wow.
So he was a very smart man, but he had nothing to show for it, like diploma wise or anything along those lines when
Mm,
we came over here. So he had to start over and prove himself every step of the way.
mm,
And he wasn't too proud, to take on any job because, again, he had mouths to feed. It wasn't just about him who needed to
right,
survive. He had mouths
right.
to feed.
Yeah.
And the same thing with my mom. I mean, my mom had to stay home and take care of my brother and I because we were so young, and even
Mm,
my sister too, right?
mm,
But both my parents took on whatever job was given to them.
right.
And if that meant working at a print factory or working in a fast food restaurant
Mm,
or cleaning people's toilets and homes all at the same time.
mm,
Nothing was beneath them because,
right.
again, all they had to do was survive.
Yeah.
And they also had to learn that different language. And they also had to learn, how to navigate like everything that we take for granted, like how to navigate buying a car, who to
Mm,
trust in buying a car. I mean, Americans who grew up in America feel that buying a car is one of the is one of the hardest things for them, the biggest fears for them. Like everyone tries to avoid buying a car because they don't want to deal with car salesmen.
Yeah.
They had to do that in another country
Mm.
that they weren't used to dealing with,
Right.
buying a home and paying taxes and, all that stuff, navigating the school system and stuff like that. Besides just raising a family and
Right.
everything involved in raising a family with young children.
Mm.
So I make fun of my mom now for not being technologically inclined and
Mm.
comfortable in any respect, like in any way whatsoever. And then she'll kind of get down on herself, like, oh, I'm so dumb, I'm so stupid, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what, mom? Like, you were able to overcome like so much adversity and you were able to keep it together when we escaped Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
when
Mm-hmm.
you had kids who were freaking out on you. Like I was not an easy baby or an easy toddler to deal with. And I remind her how she was able to survive all of that. So what? She doesn't know how to use Facebook. That's not a big deal. She and her ability to adapt to a completely different country
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and leave behind everything that she knew prior to that is a is a huge source of inspiration for me
Yeah.
because I am able to take advantage of things like having dogs and being able to, do this and go on vacation or whatever. Because I was doing that, I was able to do that off the backs of what my parents did
Absolutely.
for me,
Absolutely.
and to be honest with you, I don't think that's something that I was able to appreciate and embrace until I got a lot older.
Mm.
Because when you're younger, your parents do try to remind you of that.
Mm.
I did this for you and that for you and ba 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 ba, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all you hear is like, okay, I get it, I
Mm.
get it. And you almost like resent them for
Yeah.
constantly reminding you about this. And I, you know, um, I'll admit that I listened to it with half an ear because I was so resentful of, okay, I get it. You did all of this for us. You sacrificed so much for us. Why do you have to shove it down my throat? Because at that point, I was more focused on, you're so strict with me. I'm not allowed to do anything. And you constantly remind me of
Mm.
all the sacrifices that you have. And you just don't understand, mom.
Mm.
You just don't understand, dad. All my peers get to do this and they get to do that and blah, 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 blah. And you're making me miss out on so much because of how strict you are
Mm.
and stuff. So I resented that. And it wasn't until I was older that I came to appreciate everything that they did do.
Mm.
And and even now, well, not even now, like there was a point where I looked back and I was talking to some of my friends and I was realizing all the stuff that they did growing up as kids and all the trouble that they got into and stuff. And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I really didn't miss out on much. And,
Mm.
I'm kind of glad that I didn't go down some paths that my parents protected me from going down on that I didn't realize until now. And I even sat down my parents right after I made this realization, and I said, "Hey, I just want to let I want to thank you for being
Mm.
as strict as you were with me because I realize what you were doing now, and I appreciate you setting me and keeping me on the right path." And when I said that to my dad, I remember his face. He was like, "Who are you? And what have you done with my daughter?" You
Mm.
know? And I think it really helped for both of them to hear that what they did paid off in that
Yeah.
way and was noticed because parents don't get a lot of grief for what they put their kids through a lot of times. But I think that everyone, parents included, because they're just people, I think everyone tries their best with the tools that they're given.
Mm.
And sometimes we're not given like the best fitting tools for certain situations, but you still try your best.
Yeah.
And My parents still freak out about the fact that I'm not a doctor, that I'm
Mm.
not a lawyer, and that I didn't marry rich or something along those lines, because in their minds, they're still kind of stuck in this whole like in Vietnam, if you weren't the top, the tippy tippy top of your class, then your future was kind of doomed. And if you're
Mhm.
not somebody like a doctor or a lawyer, again, your future is doomed. And it's hard for them to understand, even now, even after living most of their lives in America as opposed to Vietnam, it's still hard for them to come to terms with that, where you can be okay, you can be safe and successful and happy by not being a doctor or a lawyer or something along those lines, you know?
Yeah.
So it's still a process with them, but the tools that they were given in growing up were that is not okay. That's
Mhm.
not acceptable. And they're trying, but that's their instinct to immediately feel that way. So as an adult, the stuff that my parents went through, I don't know if I could do it.
Mm.
Because I'm soft compared to what they are. They grew up a lot harder as
Mhm.
harder people. People, their circumstances made them harder people. And my circumstances, because of them, made me a much softer person.
Yeah. Everything that you said, I can definitely relate to 100%. 100%. Um, many times it feels like it's never enough, right?
Mhm, 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 mhm,
And again, from parents, and I'm a parent of three kids myself, so I know, but I think our parents, the generation that had to go through all the war struggle, and my dad being in the military, just a constant daily fear and anxiety, being shot at and not knowing if you're gonna come home alive, or whether the living on the barracks that I grew up on, family would have gotten bombed, and just a whole host of anxiety and living in constant fear. And it's a generational thing in our culture where we've been occupied by French and the Chinese and many other, so our country through the years, hundreds and not thousands of years, have been attacked or have been, occupied in some way, and it's a constant battle for survival and food.
mhm,
And so it's part of our DNA to, if not survive, but uh, try to rise beyond that and thrive beyond that. And here we are in America with all the freedoms and the opportunity, and you should go all the way to the top. And it's a real struggle for not
mhm,
everybody can be a doctor, mom. Not everybody can be that.
mhm.
I know your background. You work at a high tech company, Canon. There, and myself, I studied engineering and did the best I could. We live here in the tech world here in Redmond here. So, but I totally know where you're coming from in terms of just our parents are identical in that sense. It's
Mhm,
like constant,
mhm.
always fighting, and it's good or bad. It's a constant fighting mentality, right? All from that
Yeah,
standpoint.
where imperfection is not an option, right?
Yeah,
Imperfection is not an option. The A instead of the A plus is also not an option.
yeah,
And there's pros and cons to
of
that.
course,
Right?
of
There's
course.
definitely pros and cons to that. Like I tell people this story about how I play piano. I started playing when I was like 3 years old. My dad started getting me professional lessons since then.
Yeah.
But when I would practice, when they were listening, when I was practicing, if I made like one mistake, I
Mm,
couldn't push through it and get to the
hmm.
end of the song. I
Right,
had to start from the beginning and
right.
keep on playing until I played the whole song without making a single mistake. And it was just an example of that
Yeah, yeah,
mentality,
yeah,
where
yeah,
it's like, nope, perfection, perfection, perfection. You have to do it that way.
yeah.
And you know what I find really, really interesting? Like, we're talking to each other, we're not related,
Hmm.
right? And we're talking to each other, and we're like, yes, 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 I relate to that. And that totally resonates with me and everything
Hmm.
else. And in New Jersey, there weren't a lot of Vietnamese people, like, not compared to
LA or Houston.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. Or even Georgia
yeah,
or Louisiana and
yeah.
stuff like that. Like there weren't a lot of Vietnamese people. So the only Vietnamese people I knew were my cousins,
Mm,
my cousins on my dad's side.
yeah.
So whatever similarities we had with like, oh, my dad is so strict, my mom is so strict, they expect this and blah, blah, blah. We just thought it was like a familial trait
Yeah.
and a relative thing and not necessarily a cultural thing.
Mm.
So once I started getting older, and it wasn't until recently with the advent of social media and being able to connect with a lot more people because of that,
Mm.
um, finding other Vietnamese people around my age and how we're like there's a term that I heard somebody say, like refer to us. We're not first generation and we are immigrants, but there's a term. It was almost like half generation or something like that. I forget
Mm.
the term, but anyway, it describes people who we were really young, and so we weren't adults when we came over, but
Right.
we're not like we weren't born in America either, right? So we're
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of like you said, one foot in, one foot out,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to balance that. It it like I scream when I hear similar stories. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, I can't believe that we're all experiencing such similar things. And it's not because our parents were siblings,
Mm.
or our uncles were siblings and stuff like that. So I get super duper excited
Yeah.
when I hear all these similar things because I feel like I'm not alone. And it kind of justifies all the thoughts that I had while I was growing up.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. At the in you made a really strong point. I mean, younger days, yeah, the resentment, but why is my mom and dad so strict? And the other thing that I struggle with myself is like uh, uh my parents. Um, I don't know, one of those moments where not enough is that sort of hug or that emotional, especially dad and son, it's very non-existent. And so one of the things that I learned from that is for my own kids, tell them every day, I love you. I'm
Hmm.
proud of you,
Hmm.
to acknowledge their wins and to be more I don't know, emotionally closer than how, my dad, military guy, old school of that generation. And when you know what I mean when I say of that
Yes.
generation, right?
Yes.
Very stern, stoic, seen and not heard.
Yep.
And so for me uh, uh, it's I struggle with that as an adult at times. But okay, that aside, we give grace to our parents. They they went through a lot more sacrifices and hardship and the obstacles and the stress and the anxiety. As an adult, we understand that. But
Hmm.
how do I make my relationship a little better with my own kids, right?
Hmm.
And to instill the more um, the more positive things in life. Every day it's we're out there. If we're not trying to get good grades, we're trying to make better for ourselves and our family. And some days it's easier than others. But at the end of it all, it's we're a family or we're a community. They're trying to uplift each other. So out of that experience, for me personally, my mom and dad, everything that you said, I completely resonate with. But I think you would agree also that without our parents' guidance, without our parents' sacrifice, our story, my story, your story right now would be quite different. And so, um, right? Uh,
100%.
yeah,
100%. I feel like, and that's why I thanked my parents,
yeah,
for keeping us, trying to keep me on the straight and narrow
yeah,
and stuff. I feel like I would have probably gotten a lot more lost and, you know, uh, just not as aware. Yeah, I mean, like, there's so many ways that my life would have been completely different.
yeah,
I
yeah.
also am a believer of things happening for a reason too.
Sure,
So if my parents weren't as strict, what would have happened? Or if only one parent was strict and the other one wasn't? I don't know. There's a multitude, an infinite number of things that could have happened, but
yeah,
things happened the way they were. And I didn't think also, I didn't believe in this saying that you turn into your parents as you get older, because my parents were so strict and I was so rebellious. And now I find myself being extremely strict in
Mm.
my way of
Wow.
thinking. Yeah, I can understand like the rebellious side and stuff,
Yeah.
but I'm like, okay, be rebellious, but this is the right way.
Yeah.
My strict way is the right way. So
Right.
I find it ironic,
Yeah.
that I'm
Yeah.
turning into my parents the older
Yeah.
I get.
The other thing that I learned also, and I don't know if you can relate to this. I don't know, but growing up, uh, my Vietnamese was terrible. You know, absolute terrible. It still is today. Gypsy, just a little bit here and there, just to get by, to travel.
Uh-huh.
But otherwise, as a kid growing up with your parents and the need, the desire to communicate, the desire to find the right vocabulary to articulate your feelings, to articulate your struggle and your challenge to my parents was so difficult because they couldn't speak English in a way that, right? In terms of
Mm,
articulating how you feel. And the
mm,
same way with me back to them. Okay, that aside, I've learned that with my own kids, there should be no excuses for not communicating with my kids. Right? We speak
mhm.
English at home, and so that's one thing that I learned from growing up is like, uh, don't use language as a barrier to not communicating with your loved ones.
Mhm, mhm,
And I recognizing that because of language barrier inside the house. Uh, Fortunately, with myself and with my own kids, I'm able to communicate in English, and at times I over communicate, right? And but that's what I've learned to self-correct in terms of this side of the fence growing up and how I wanted to see it. So communication between me and my own kids right now, I hold that as a high sort of priority. Is always constantly communicate with. So,
Yeah, I fortunately did not have that struggle as much,
mhm.
and mostly because they forced me to speak so much Vietnamese,
Mhm.
that I think my conversational Vietnamese with them, like I wasn't gonna obviously talk politics or business, so I didn't
Yeah,
have that vocabulary. It was just more my vocabulary and anything that I needed to convey to them as a child to an adult. That was all okay. And
yeah.
their English was very advanced.
Okay.
So I would say my dad's vocabulary his English vocabulary may even be better than mine. Like,
Wow.
I know, like his vocabulary is amazing. His pronunciation sucks, but his vocabulary is amazing.
Mhm.
So he knows a lot of words, a lot more words than I think I do. And that has helped a lot.
Oh, for sure.
So that was never an issue. And we spoke Vinglish, if I didn't know his
That's right, in English.
um if I didn't know a word, I would just say it with like a Vietnamese
And
accent,
yeah, and they
like
would know. They
so
would know.
yeah. And so they know, and but their English was really, really good too. So I
Yeah.
didn't have to worry about that. My mom actually worked as a translator. She worked as a translator both back in Vietnam in
Oh,
some
okay.
ways,
There,
and
there you
then
go.
also in America. Like that was her job to work as a court translator, and she worked in the guidance department at a school, and she helped other, Vietnamese people there translate things. So
Yeah.
their English was really, really good.
Yeah. No, that's
But
wonderful.
so it wasn't the words that I would struggle with. It was just more the priorities,
Mhm.
and the values
Yeah.
that would go head to head with each other.
Yeah.
But the appreciation that I have for my parents was not there growing
Mm.
up at
Mm.
all. But I think that happens to a lot of us,
Yeah.
Vietnamese or not, immigrant or not. Like I think kids, a lot of days, it's just part of the natural part of growing up and not realizing that your parents are looking out for the best for
Of
you
course.
and for your family, and you're
Yeah.
just kind of rebelling against it and
Yeah. Yeah.
not able to see beyond what's in front of your face.
Yeah.
So it's just,
Yeah.
I think it's a universal thing.
Yeah. At times, as a kid, it can be suffocating having a parent that cares too much. And sets those strict policies and boundaries. And so I guess the key word is balance, right? In terms of just
Mhm.
from that
Mhm,
standpoint.
mhm. But I mean,
Uh,
you were talking too about like speaking of balance, you were talking about how you try to um bridge that gap or be mindful,
mm,
right? Of that emotional connection
that's the point. Yep.
with your kids. But
Yeah.
you ever find yourself overcompensating for that? Do you think that you're too nice or too kind or whatever to them because you're trying to make up for that with
Uh,
your dad or anything?
no, no. I tell my kids, hey, I'm not your friend. I am your dad.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
there's, I want the best for you. And nobody's going to be your biggest fan than your parents.
Huh?
And so I come from that position, from that standpoint. And
That's really, really good because I think I see a lot of other parents who want the best for their kids, right? But then overcome not overcompensate. What's the right word I want to use here? Um, they had their own struggles, so they're like, I don't want my kids to deal with anything like what I had to go through. So
sure.
I'm going to just spoil them rotten and give them everything that their hearts could ever desire and not realize though that those actions are hurting their kids
Mm,
a little bit more than they realize
right,
when they're
right.
not teaching them that, you have to first of all earn things and learn that you have to work for them. And you also have to be able to let go and allow your kids to fail and to fall so that they can learn how to pick themselves back up, so that
Yeah,
they can learn those lessons of what to do right and what to do wrong. Because if they just get spoon-fed everything,
yeah,
they're
yeah,
not going to be able to
exactly,
learn stuff. So I
exactly.
see that happening a lot
Yeah.
with immigrants, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, well, that's there's for sure in terms of spoiling our kids, right? Because
Mhm.
I grew up as a kid not having much of anything, used
Mhm.
bikes and used toys here and there, and we went to Goodwill and all that
Yep.
other stuff. And so,
Yep.
as an adult now, we we tend to overspoil our kids with things that we never had, and but
Mhm.
you know, again, a balance and um, yeah, raising kids and all.
Mhm.
Let me pivot our conversation. So I think that the last part of our conversation here, and it still has to do with the themes of community and uplifting and inspiring others and just making the audience or the folks out there brighten their day. And talk about your amazing Eskies. And we've read that you have a show that you put on for communities and for schools and the elders. And so, what's the talk about that?
So I had a dog growing up as a child. And unfortunately, that dog grew up with a lot of people being mean to him. Because I mentioned before about like living next to the public school and whatnot, and kids
Yeah.
just being mean and stuff. So unfortunately, this poor dog, I mean, like it kind of brings me to tears thinking about it, talking about it. But this poor innocent little puppy, he was a little Shih Tzu. And the kids during recess at the public school next door, they would be like, Puppy, 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 come here, let me pet you. And he would come to the fence all innocent and unknowing. And they would be really mean to him, where they would like grab him through the fence and hold on to him and kick him and, throw rocks and throw like lit firecrackers at him and stuff like that. And so this poor dog had no chance growing up to be a trusting dog of other people. So this dog bit everyone.
Mm,
And when I was an adult, I swore that I was not going to let that happen to any of my pets, where I wanted that dog to be just socialized as much as possible. So once my husband and I got married and we were able to have our own house with our own yard and everything like that, we knew that we were going to get a dog. We were both dog
mm,
lovers, and we researched the heck out of all these dog breeds because he had a bad experience in just, picking a dog out of looks or a story and not understanding what the dog was bred for. And it was just the worst match possible. So we researched the heck out of dog breeds and we decided upon a dog breed called the American Eskimo dog. And the name is actually a misnomer because they're neither American nor Eskimo, has nothing to do with any of that. They're actually originally known as German or European Spitz dogs,
mm.
but they were mostly known as German Spitz dogs. And after World War One, everybody hated Germany. So they got rebranded. They got rebranded in the United States, and they were known as, instead of Spitz dogs and German Spitz dogs, they got rebranded to American Eskimo so that
Mm.
people didn't realize what their origins were. And I loved everything about this dog. And my husband and I, we had a list, a short list, and all this other stuff. And we decided upon this breed. And I made it a mission of mine to make sure that whatever pet we had was going to be super friendly with everyone and super sociable and everything else. So it was just going to be our pet. That was it. And this first dog, his name was Atka.
Mm.
And I would take Atka around to supermarkets and I would stand in front of the exits and entrances. And that was how I socialized him. I encouraged everyone to come up and pet him and play with him and talk to him. And it was through that he was able to just, get used to all different types of people, whether they be large or small or short or tall or fast or however they smelled, and shopping carts, like all these distractions and crazy noises and everything else, he just got completely used to.
Mm.
And one day there was this old World War II veteran who kind of like hobbled up to where I was standing outside with Atka, and there was no one else around, and he didn't say anything to me. And Atka took a look at him, and there was something going on between him and this World War II veteran. And they made eye contact with each other and they just slowly approached each other. And this veteran bent down and he starts petting Atka. And there's
Mm.
no words exchanged or anything. He's just petting him really, really quietly. And then after he was done, he straightened up and he said to me, "Young lady, petting your dog just made my entire year.
Mm.
Thank you for that opportunity." And it was at that moment that I said to myself, oh my gosh, my dog has this special ability to connect with people.
Mm.
And I need to take him and turn him into a therapy dog.
Mm.
So after that day, I researched, therapy dog organizations that were local in New Jersey. And unbeknownst to me, I had been training him to, do certain things. And unbeknownst to me, the things that I was training him on were the things that the therapy dog organizations wanted their volunteers to train their dogs on. Things
Yeah.
like, walking up to say hello to somebody and not doing this and doing that, blah, blah, blah. So we became a therapy dog partner team. And we graduated and all this other stuff. And then unfortunately, we learned that being a therapy dog in conventional situations was not a good match for us.
Mm.
And we didn't learn this until the hard way when we started going to nursing homes where, American Eskimo dogs are very heavily coated. They just look like big white puffballs.
Yeah.
So they are built for cold weather. And going into the nursing homes, most of the rooms in the nursing homes are about I'd say like 9,000 degrees or something like that, give or take,
Yeah.
right? And he would be sweating like crazy. And I'm sorry, not sweating, but just super duper hot. I was sweating like crazy.
Yeah.
And the poor dog was just really suffering from this. And once he became stressed, he became irritable and he was no longer a good therapy dog.
Right.
And so, they're really smart dogs. And so I was like, okay, this is not going to be a good venue for him and a good outlet for him anymore. But I knew that he could do it. He passed, the tests for it. So, as smart dogs, you need to give them some sort of outlet because if you don't, just like kids, they'll start utilizing their powers for not for good anymore, and their energy not for good anymore. They'll just come up with things for themselves to do, and it's usually not. It's usually destructive things. So I was
Mm.
like, you know what? I'm going to teach him a bunch of different tricks just for fun, and blah
Yeah.
blah blah. And then one thing led to another where we found other we got the attention actually of somebody who had their own dog signed up with an animal agent. And I had wanted nothing to do with any of that. Like I was not interested in like the Hollywood lifestyle or anything along those lines. Long story short, she convinced me to meet this one agent who was very, very trustworthy, who lived in New
Mm.
York. She evaluated Atka and everything he was able to do, and the fact that he was bomb proof, you know, ignored distractions and whatnot. She was like, I want to take you guys on as one of our clients. And her biggest her biggest client was actually Saturday Night Live.
Mm.
And so we started getting a lot of requests to do certain tricks and all this other stuff. And fast forward to where we are today, we had a lot of opportunities through various people to take the tricks that we had taught our dogs and their personalities at being really good therapy dogs and combining that into a show where we were able to both entertain people and also provide a lot of comfort to them as the therapy dogs and as, especially in the nursing homes, as reminders of their own dogs. Because, a lot of times
Mm.
they can't bring their own pets into the nursing homes and stuff.
Right.
And we help people overcome their fear of dogs when it comes to some of the shows that we get hired for, like, let's say, at a library setting or something along those lines. Because
Mm.
our dogs aren't the type of dogs where they're exciting and they're doing all these tricks that pull in audience members to help them with the tricks. So people are sitting there and they expect to just watch a show, but now they're getting pulled up to have dogs jump through their arms or over them or something. And people are like freaking out about this. But at the same time, the dogs, can turn on and turn off, and they're able to sit right next to that really calm dog and take pictures and not feel like they have to be nervous around a really high energy dog at any time. And when we go to the nursing homes and stuff, we're able to bring catatonic patients out of their state of mind and
Mm.
respond. And that's not something that humans can do sometimes with patients who are in that frame of mind and in that
Yeah.
condition. And it's like miracles that we see with our dogs. So, they do these trick shows, they do this therapy dog work. They're also models, through a lot of
Mm.
their through the agents that they retain. So they've modeled for Ralph Lauren,
Mm.
for Martha Stewart, for PetSmart, for like a lot of cool, cool things. And that's just another side of my life where, I have my regular job at Canon as a project manager. I work with Vietnam veterans and
Yeah.
try to bring some sort of peace and closure to them by letting them know how appreciated they are. And then we work with the elderly in the nursing
Mm.
homes to give them a little bit of joy in their lives and a lot of the children that see us at our shows at the library and people who are afraid of dogs and are able to get over that too. So the things that we wound up getting involved in, my husband and I, have been really fulfilling in ways
Mm-hmm.
that we just never planned on having when we were just gonna get married, have kids. That didn't work out. We never wound up having kids
Mm.
and having a pet. That was it. And the course of our lives have just taken such a turn,
Yeah.
in ways that we are just really, really grateful to be on with these paths.
Yeah. For sure, you and your husband are exemplary in terms of just citizens in your community, working with different community groups, elderly and schools, and with the veteran community. So uh, the world needs more people like you and your husband out there to, to lighten things up around us. And so um, I want to thank you so much for, taking the time out to share your story with me and the audience. And is there anything else that you want to close up with, or any thoughts you want to share, advice, or uh, yeah, words of wisdom?
Um, the biggest lesson that I learned also is to not wait to say what's on your mind,
Mm.
not be afraid to also say what's on your mind, and to not take the present for granted, thinking that there's always a tomorrow. So if you feel something, take the chance and say it to somebody else. Tell your parents that you love them, that you appreciate everything that they did. Reach out to somebody and let them know that, maybe a conversation that you had with them 10 years ago and something that they may have said then really lifted your spirits and was exactly what you needed to hear. Or even something as simple and, um, what may seem superficial as, oh, you have a really nice smile, or you look
Mm,
nice today, or something along those lines, can really make a difference in someone's life. And
yeah.
whether that be somebody like a Vietnam veteran, or an elderly person, or your parents, or your siblings, or a coworker, or just a friend, I think that we should not be afraid to, speak our mind, especially if it's something really nice.
Beautiful. I want to ask one last question.
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge the shirt that you're wearing. Talk about the shirt that you're wearing and the
Well,
significance of that.
yes, this is a shirt that has a design of the South Vietnamese flag on here as well too.
Hmm.
And because I'm part of the diaspora of South Vietnamese people who escaped communist Vietnam and to another country, I really try to honor my South Vietnamese heritage when I can, especially when I'm talking about things like our Vietnam veterans that we're
Yeah,
honoring in America, and our parents and my heritage. This is part of my heritage.
yeah,
And so the flag, the actual flag is three horizontal red stripes on a yellow background. And this is just that design turned, on its side. But I'm proud of this flag. I'm proud of my heritage. It's not something that I always held to a high esteem when I was growing up. But now I try to emulate that and reflect that and hang on to that as much as possible.
yeah. It's a symbolism of what our parents, my father, fought for, and the freedom and liberty, and the things that we're still trying to uh, work hard today to keep here in America in terms of
Yeah,
that. So,
yeah.
thank you so much again, T, for the opportunity. So it was great talking with you.
I really appreciate you inviting me on and being able to share all of our thoughts, or all of our common thoughts,
Yeah.
together. And I hope that those listening will be able to get a little something out of this, whether they be Vietnamese or American or
Mm.
anything in between.
Yeah, beautiful. Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you.